Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 554. My guest this week is David Ciccarelli, the founder and CEO of vacation rental business Lake. I had David on the show back on episode 343 in 2021, and at that time, we talked about his business Voices.com. He discussed how rebranding to a great domain helped his business. Well, after selling Voices.com, he's back at it with another business using a great domain, Lake.com. On today's show, David talks about why he felt it was important to get a great domain for this venture and how he acquired it. Now, if the name Voices.com rings a bell, that's because I recently wrote about a UDRP in which the company, Voices.com, tried to get Voices.ai through a UDRP and failed. Now, David was the original registrant of Voices.ai while he was at the company. After he left, someone dropped the ball and it expired, and then they filed the UDRP. But David had nothing to do with the UDRP, so just want to get that out there ahead of time. All right, we will chat with David in a few minutes, but first, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Salve.com. Transfer your domains to Salve and save. Right now, transfer .coms for only $9.65, .org for $10.52, .io only $44.99. Plus, Salve doesn't raise your prices a lot at renewal time. In fact, right now, .com renewals are just $10.15. Start transferring your domains and saving money. Go to salve.com/DNW/transfer. That's SAV.com/DNW/transfer. All right, some news from the past week. First up, Cum Laude isn't a company that makes a lot of news often, but in the past 2 weeks, it's announced 2 acquisitions. 2 weeks ago, it was domain consultancy Fairwinds Partners. Last week, the company announced it was acquiring Markmonitor at an enterprise value of $450 million. Newfold Digital, a private equity-backed roll-up that includes Bluehost and Network Solutions, is the seller. They acquired the business for $300 million a few years back. This will be the 5th owner of Markmonitor in the last 15 years. Cum Laude is led by Ben Crawford, who's the previous CEO of Team Internet Group, and he grew that company through acquisition. He seems to be doing the same thing at his new home. Trademarkia has added a party to a trademark lawsuit that it filed against Adam.com. The original lawsuit claimed that in addition to owning Trademark.io, Adam also owned Trademark.ai. I pointed out that that didn't appear to be the case, and now Trademarkia has amended its lawsuit to state that entrepreneur Dharmesh Shah's company, On Startups, is the actual owner of the .ai domain. Shah is the co-founder of HubSpot and knows a lot about domain names. He was the man who bought and sold Chat.com for over $10 million. Well, the purge of advertisers from showing their Google ads on park domains has ramped up, and it spells bad news for domain name companies. While one major parking company said it wasn't seeing much of an effect through the first half of this year, it now says there have been major impacts on ad inventory and revenue in recent weeks. And this effectively spells the end of AdSense for domains, in my opinion. Some companies, especially arbitrage companies, can move to related search for content, commonly abbreviated as RSOC. But I'm hearing that Google continues to modify the guidelines for RSOC. For those that only show ads on parked pages, like domain name registrars, they might need to look into parking companies with alternative feeds, such as Skinzo's Yahoo ad feed. In other news, the company behind internet postage company Stamps.com lost a UDRP last week against Stamps.ai. It also lost a case against ShipStation.ai, with the panelists finding reverse domain name hijacking because the company made a false claim about the domain name owner. You can read that article in a post on September 23rd. And finally, a bit of self-promotion here. If you haven't checked it out yet, please download the Domain Name Wire app. You get exclusive in-app content, including weekly expired domain lists. If you use an Apple device, go to dnw.com/Apple. If you're on Android, go to dnw.com/Android. Or, of course, you can just search for Domain Name Wire in the App Store. All right, now let's chat with David Ciccarelli. My guest this week is David Ciccarelli. He is the founder and CEO of Lake. David, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
So I say welcome back. This is your first time on as the founder and CEO of Lake. Previously, it was the founder and CEO of Voices. And people that want to listen to that can go back to episode 343 of this podcast. But I do want to go back in time for those that haven't listened to that show and talk just a little bit about that. So tell me about what Voices was.
Yeah, Voices is an online marketplace for voice actors, a freelancer marketplace connecting clients from ad agencies, video production companies with professional voice actors. That business I started originally with my dear wife, Stephanie, in 2005 and grew it from just the two of us to 150 employees. We brought on a private equity firm who invested over $25 million into the business and really became the industry leading platform of its kind.
And you didn't start that though, as you ended up getting voices.com, but you started it under a different name, right?
Yeah, we started as Interactive Voices, which is a bit of a mouthful. It really pigeonholed us into being kind of new and interactive media. People didn't know if it was voice interactive voices, singular, plural. So I was pretty determined to acquire a great, more simplified domain name. I looked at Vox.com, Voxy, Voxio. Everything was kind of like dropping vowels back in like 2007, I think is when we acquired it. Dropping vowels, kind of big, bright, bubbly visual identity. But I thought, you know what? Rather than a whole rebranding, perhaps, as I coined it, the name simplification, what if we just cut out the interactive part and we're just voices.com? It was being used by a medical journal, again, for years that hadn't been updated since, I think, early 2000s. So it was really just kind of a sitting there, unused premium domain name. I reached out to the owner, asked them, actually, I'd work with a lawyer to send an email on my behalf, which is actually, this is a great tip for those trying to acquire a domain. If you're David at interactivevoices.com trying to buy voices.com, they're probably going to increase the price because they know you're already in the business. But if you work through a third party, either a broker or a lawyer to send an email on your behalf, making that first inquiry keeps your anonymity in place, and you can kind of get a better feel of if they're willing to sell, if so, what price. And so, we ended up acquiring that name for $30,000, which we paid in 6 installments of $5,000 each. And we got to use the name right away, relaunched the site under this new name. And it really kind of took off after that point.
Yeah. What do you think were the impacts there? I mean, you say it took off, but like what made it take off having that shorter name?
It defined the category, was one of the first concepts. People that were our customers, we had about 10,000 customers at the time. And people that were already with us were like, bravo, like applauding us that like they were kind of in it with us, that this was a community that we were developing, and they felt a greater sense of pride being on a platform that was the category defining platform. That was one. The other thing that happened around the same time was the first launch of the Amazon Kindle and the kind of really early days of like text to speech, these computerized voices. And anytime a journalist was doing their own research online, looking for a story, and you see voices.com, as one of the players in the space, it sounds like the go-to destination, and they might have a point of view or a unique perspective that they can offer on the space. So we got a lot of stories just inbound, believe it or not, increased from CNN, New York Times, and eventually kind of led that to publishing our own research as well too under that brand. So I think both kind of like the obviousness of the name, that it doubled as, the destination, and kind of what we did all in one, was something that I was looking to repeat again in the future with Lake. But that's what I think kind of put it down to, at least 2 tangible examples of how it took off.
Let's talk about Lake. So you left Voices and you started a business in a vacation rental business. Now, when I hear this, I think, wow, this is dominated by a couple big companies, Airbnb and, well, I guess it's now Vrbo. I would say HomeAway, just being old school here, but it seems kind of crowded and such. But tell me why you decided to go into this.
So you're right. I mean, I exited the previous venture through private equity acquisition. I was definitely ready to build my next company. This time, though, I wanted to apply all those hard-won lessons, kind of the playbook that I developed over the previous 20 years of scaling a business from the ground up. And one of the most important things was that domain name itself. I wanted to pick an industry that I really enjoyed. As a frequent traveler, I spend 75 nights a year in hotels and vacation rentals for both business and family as well too. But I knew the travel sector was one that I wanted to focus on. Why I picked lake houses in particular, the idea crystallized when our family purchased a lake house of our own for summer vacations. And we actually hosted 2 large family reunions, one on my wife's Stephanie's side and one on mine. Welcomed as many people into our home as we could. We turned to Airbnb and Vrbo, kind of the 2 behemoths in the space for available vacation rentals. But surprisingly, the inventory was pretty thin. They were either too far from our place, too far from the water, too small to host a large family, kind of as only like a 2-person kind of cabin, or located on an island, which was just impractical unless you had a boat. And the only hotel option, Andrew, was charging $700 a night during peak season. So it just wasn't feasible. I felt like there was a gap in the market. And if this was our microcosm kind of recreational area just north of Toronto, I sense that it's probably true in other locations as well. So I validated it, which is an important step, by reading all the shareholder letters from Expedia, Booking Holdings, Airbnb. 2 things stood out. First, half of all vacation rentals take place in rural destinations, which if you pause, you realize, okay, people from the city want to get out of the city. They want to go to the backcountry. So that aligned well. And lakes, I think 80% of them in the US are man-made lakes. They're water reservoirs that are about 60 miles or 60, 90 minutes outside of major metropolitan areas. We call these drive-to destinations. And the other thing that stood out are the top 3 types of vacation stays are beach houses, lake houses, and mountain homes. So there's this water theme that seems to be going through all of it. So that was really our next step, was acquiring a world-class domain name that served both as the corporate identity, but ultimately was going to be the consumer-facing brand,
right.
Lake.com.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting here, you kind of, I guess some people will call it niche down, right? Like if you just launched a vacation rental place to go after Airbnb, well, they've got some pretty deep pockets, right? And so, but by focusing on this one area, I imagine it gets both the renters who are looking for a house near a lake, as well as the landowners, right? The I don't know what you call it in this case, the landlord.
Yeah, the homeowners, the hosts themselves that are looking to rent it out.
It gets them because they're like, okay, these people might know my unique need and that sort of thing. You ended up getting lake.com. What came first, the idea of the name for the business or the domain name?
Well, actually, it was the idea for the business came first. I knew I wanted to pick ideally this category defining domain name. I was really uncompromising on this. So it actually started with the brainstorm of what names might be suitable before even looking at any registries online of like who's selling what. I thought that would just narrow it down. Stephanie and I considered a number of names, rest.com, restful, restfully. They just seemed to lack the energy. They sounded a little sleepy to me. Yeah. And it didn't pick a segment. We also considered lake house or lake houses, but not only were they taken, they also defined just the property type as opposed to the type of destination that would encompass a variety of styles. So we wanted a niche, but it needed to be broader appeal. So lake.com, was one that we had brainstormed, typed it in right into the browser, and what shows up but a landing page. And sure enough, it's for sale with the splash page sharing the price, contact information, and a form to fill it out. And so that was like my first step. For those, listening, is like, is that an encouraging step or is it discouraging? Should you bother? Even if the price is, it's high, but it might be within the realm of reason, you never know how motivated that buyer is. The fact that there's a splash page there is, I think, a really good sign, because that tells you that not only is the owner, the seller, willing to sell, they are wanting to sell because they have a price listed, they're working with the broker. And that was definitely the case in this situation as well.
Yeah. And so for those listening, so the splash page he's talking about was a Markmonitor splash page, which shows you it's a big company. If you look up the historical it was Dolby, the audio company, owned it. I guess, in some cases when you see Markmonitor, it's going to be expensive, but Lake.com was going to be expensive anyway, right? So that wasn't necessarily the discouraging factor. And you said it had a price on there, so you kind of knew ballpark.
Yeah, the price was, mid to low seven figures. So in the multiple millions of dollars. I'm not at liberty to kind of pin down the exact kind of final price, but it was definitely over seven figures. A huge investment by any count, but having done this once before, I saw how valuable it was that people just knew who you were. It sounded like we were the authority that had always been there. And we're not just buying letters that people punch in. We're building a brand and we're defining that we own this category. That was the aspiration behind the acquisition.
Yeah, I think, one way to think about this, you just got back from a conference, right? Was that a travel industry conference? Or?
Yeah, it was Skift. They call it Skift Global Forum in New York. They call it the most powerful room in travel. I mean, it was the CEOs of every major travel company, from airlines to cruises to vacation rentals, as well as hotels. So it was a great experience.
Well, and so, thinking about this, you're fairly new to this industry, right? You founded this business, in 2 years ago? Or?
Yeah, just 2 years ago. And, it's the first couple of years of any business are going to be building the infrastructure, the legal and accounting framework, the infrastructure of technology, and just building out your product, right? That's going to...
I guess I'm just thinking, if you walked into that conference and you're like, lakehomesforrent.com, you're not going to get the respect that you probably got just saying, yeah, Lake and Lake.com.
Oh, yeah. It was amazing. I mean, people just inevitably, as you're networking, right? They glance down at your name tag and they're like, oh, Lake.com. The number of times, Andrew, that people are like, how did you get this domain name and what's the story? So that in and of itself is a great opener.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the negotiation process here. So you saw a seven-figure number. You said you paid seven figures for it, but how did the process go once you reached out?
Yeah, we worked. There's a few things that you need to recognize in terms of the process and negotiation. Price is only one lever that is negotiable, but there's also the structure. So is it a lump sum upfront versus an installment, like quarterly, like monthly or quarterly payments? Is it a lease to own? So I quickly teased out that they wanted a lump sum upfront payment, and there was some sense of urgency on their part, which led to me realizing, okay, I need to have cash available and at the ready to make this happen. It's kind of like if you go buy, whether it's a car or even at a farmer's market or a fair, if you have cash, you can typically get a better deal because it's right there. They're saving fees. And even on large transactions like a premium domain name, having evidence, which was simply a screenshot of the bank account where this was going to come from. I mean, there's obviously a high degree of trust in the process, but there was let's qualifying the buyer, which was me. They wanted to see that. So price was one thing, structure, timing. Was there exclusivity on this one? How quickly could I transfer the funds into escrow? These were all important factors, but I think they also wanted to know, and I would imagine other owners of domain names, they also want to know that it's going to a reputable source, that it's going to go into good hands. So having a bit of a story there as well, too, of two-time entrepreneur, ready to kind of, rerun the playbook and kind of let this be the second act, I think was something that they were encouraged by, and everything lined up. But the process itself was like email exchanges on the key points of price and timing and confidentiality and kind of any announcement, which there really wasn't one. It was just more, which is what they wanted. After that email exchange was set up, then it moved from the broker and I to the lawyers communicating with one another.
So there was kind of a purchase contract here.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to add that the purpose of the lawyers was to set up an APA, which is an asset purchase agreement that just defines the scope of what actually is being purchased. There was a business run on this site before. It wasn't acquiring any of the technology or anything like that. It was just the rights and transfer of the domain name itself.
And so did you do escrow through an attorney or did you use a service?
This is a good question. I'm trying to go back in time. we used a service, I believe it was actually escrow.com, which I had used before as well too. Yeah.
Sure. I assume then your experience with voices and that name change was a big part of your decision here to go get this category killer domain, if you will. Category killer, but let me define that one more. It's also a brand. And so if you'd gone lakehomes.com, that would be defining, but Lake is a little bit broader and it can be a brand, right?
Yeah. I mean, we also went through this challenge at Voices, and I originally was kind of facing it at Lake, like, okay, so do we include the .com in the logo? Do we refer to ourselves as lake.com? At Voices, we were always voices.com until the last couple of years, it just became Voices, and it just was like synonymous with the category. So I thought, oh man, that was a really painful kind of rebranding, especially with social media accounts. I tried just to kind of describe it as Lake, but then people are like, Lake what? Like what it, like, you know, and they just didn't, it lacked the like authority of saying, no, it's lake.com. And as soon as people saw that, it's almost like every conference we go to, it's how we're introduced when people at networking, they see it in the email signature on social media. We're just like, man, let's stop fighting this one. Like if everyone is referring to us as lake.com, then it's probably a better move because it does stand on its own. But once you're at the site, the logo just says Lake. We have a couple variations for different contexts, but yeah, the logo just says
Lake. Yeah. Do you worry at all that the name pigeonholes you, though? You know, you mentioned there's lake homes, but there's oceanfront homes, or you know, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that happened a little organically when we first built the platform and released that, you know, MVP, that minimally viable product. The people that were signing up were surprisingly actually property managers, not necessarily individuals. And a property manager manages 10, 20, 100 properties on behalf of the homeowner, right? They welcome the guests in, they market the guests. It's really this, they earn a commission as well too. And so so their role really is, how do we fill up the calendar? And when they were signing up, you know, they were signing up and asking questions like, oh, do I have to be on a lake? How close to the lake can we be? I'm by an ocean and not. So, you know, perhaps it's positioning here, but the best we could come up with was properties that are on or near the water, like by the water properties. You know, I grew up on Lake Superior. Stephanie, you know, summered on Lake Erie. So it's definitely in my blood.
Well, and those are lakes, but they're kind of ocean-like, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure. They're freshwater lakes, yeah. But you know, there's I would say there's you know, people who like to be in the city and kind of like urbanites, and there's also water people who, it doesn't matter what kind of water it is. They can kayak on a river, they can go fishing in the, you know, or they can go fishing on a lake, or they can, you know, just sit on a beach by the ocean. That was, you know, the audience that we were trying to reach, are people who just love to be by the water.
Yeah. Is there, I mean, but I imagine there's a lot of inertia here, right? I mean, people are used to going to one of the big two sites here, that sort of thing. And so how other than, is the draw for renters, for the guests, just that, hey, I want to be near the water, or is there something else?
Yeah, we're trying to establish some new amenities and options that make searching and filtering properties easier. So that's one thing. So is there a dock? How close to the water is it? What's the shoreline? Like drawing these type of attributes out that make properties more discoverable, because that really makes a difference on our lake, as I say, and it's called Muskoka, which is about an hour north of Toronto. All of the steel barons from the late 1800s in like Pennsylvania and New York, they built these mammoth cottages up there and continue to summer. It still has the oldest running steamship in operation. So it really does feel like you're stepping back in time by a couple hundred years. But the reason I bring that up is because the shoreline goes from cliffs that are like a couple hundred feet high to, there are some sandy patches. There's, you know, mostly it's kind of, you know, Canadian Shield rock that gently goes in. And that all of this matters, especially if you're spending a week or 2 or 3 on a summer vacation. You want to know, can I bring my boat? Can I dock it? These are the kinds of things. Do I have to bring life jackets, or are there already life jackets there? These are the kind of things that we want to round out those property description pages of the available properties on the platform. So that's one point of differentiation. But, you know, the other thing that we're recognizing is that the way people are searching is changing. I'm sure a story that everyone's familiar with. Yes, we might still be using Google, but Google's presenting the information either in AI overviews or in AI mode. So how is it that we can perhaps offer a similar experience, both getting included in those AI-powered search engines, ChatGPT as well, but then when they come to the site, lake.com, well, it looks like it's a vacation rental platform for just lake houses. What we're really building beneath the surface is actually an AI-powered kind of chat-like experience, a conversational way to discover properties. Why I believe the longer-term play is like a next-generation travel platform, because historically they've only been, all the sites ask the same three questions. Where are you going? When are you going? And how many people are going? Those are the same. And you have to, it's like picking these from these fields, and then you narrow down with filters. So my vision is to move from like filters to conversations and building this, really dynamic experience, this conversational experience to discover properties, as opposed to just, getting lost in the number of filters and amenities that are available on most of the platforms.
Right. Two-sided marketplaces are tricky. You've done it before with voices, but I'm curious in this case, you got the chicken and the egg, and you got the guests and the host. What have you found to be the easier to get versus the harder to get?
Yeah, well, it's more like which one do you just need to start with first, which is the supply. Because even if you go out and get the demand and people are interested, if you have no supply, you have no product, if you will, digital or otherwise, to sell. And so the supply, the difference with voices is that the freelancers, the pros, they could be anywhere in the world. That was a big element that I failed to appreciate at the time. With vacation rentals, this is very geographically focused. I mean, if you want to go to Lake Tahoe, you are only looking for properties in that area. And so this became kind of the first obvious challenge. To solve that, I used a service called AirDNA, which they actually have I would argue, the largest repository of all the vacation rental data. And they categorize it, everything from obviously location, but type of stay, average daily rate, occupancy rates. They have all of this. And one of the categories they have are called mountains and lake homes. And so looking at that, I was able to identify the top 20 geographic markets that we wanted to go after to build up supply. Now, again, that was my hypothesis. But in reality, what happened was people were signing up because they just liked the name, they discovered it somehow. And it didn't really, they were all over the place. Hot Springs, Alabama, like we have hundreds and hundreds of properties in Florida, yet they wasn't anywhere on the top 20 lake specific destinations. So sometimes you just got to grow where you're planted. If all the people are coming from a certain area, you just got to embrace that. But I think longer term, we're going to be much more selective in terms of the markets that we do go after. But to solve the supply, part of it was organic. The other aspect, as I described earlier, were these property management systems. If you integrate with the property management system, the main functionality that they do is they serve as that system of record that pushes out information, the property title, description, the photos, all the amenities, and most importantly, the calendar availability out to all the quote unquote booking channels, Airbnb, Vrbo, Lake.com, and so forth. So if there's a booking on Lake.com, it takes the availability off of Airbnb and vice versa. So if you can integrate with the property management system and get included in their app marketplace or their app store, they basically just to turn you on as a new channel and all of the properties get pushed to you. So that was the way in which we built up the inventory, which is now over 40,000 with a few kind of big partners in some key locations. But the property management systems were really the ones, it was less kind of targeting an individual homeowner that just would not be scaling. It would be more building up the inventory. And only now do we feel like we have enough inventory in a few of these key markets that we can be much more aggressive in paid search, paid ads, kind of marketing specifically those destinations.
Right. And do you work on a performance, like a commission basis, like I think the others do now?
Absolutely. I refer to that as the business model that's based on shared success. So it's a 10% commission. We only make money when they make money, right? When they're getting a booking, that's the only time that we make money. There's some other models out there that candidly I disagree with, which charge a subscription up front, but that puts all the risk and onus on the homeowner or the property manager, and it doesn't scale. It's like charging $100 a year per property. Well, some of our largest property managers have tens of thousands of properties under their, domain. So it's just not going to work. Shared success is the only way that this business should function.
All right, David. Well, this is fascinating. I wish you the best of luck here on Lake. Do you have, obviously you get this valuable domain name in your control. Do you have any tips for entrepreneurs after they make a big acquisition like this?
Absolutely. Well, now that it's in your realm, you definitely want to lock it down. So I keep our domain name separate from the hosting account. This gives you much more flexibility. You want to turn on two-factor authentication, have it app-based for your registrar and your hosting and your email that's associated with accessing that account. And then any other registry or transfer locks, you want to turn those on as well too. And, I think it wouldn't hurt to monitor and defend that if possible, acquiring other, defensive names that could be typos or any other major TLDs that you're operating in. That would be kind of a best case scenario as well. And lastly, enabling a who is change alert or any zone changes alerts. I think that would be wise. And brand monitoring through something like TalkWalker, which is a free alternative to Google Alerts as well too. Just getting those set up just to know what's happening with the domain. But yeah, wish those the best in their endeavors of getting a great domain name.
Yeah, great advice both on the value of a great domain and what it gives to you, but as well as making sure you've got this multi-million-dollar asset. You've got to secure it. So, David, thanks so much for coming on the show again.
My pleasure. Thanks again.
My guest this week has been David Ciccarelli. He is the founder and CEO of Lake. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.